She was called the Tattooed Venus, a woman who stepped into the circus spotlight covered head to toe in ink, and she changed the way the world thought about beauty. Betty Broadbent wasn't just a sideshow attraction. She was a pioneer, a cultural force, and a living canvas for some of the greatest tattooers of her time. Welcome to Skin and Story. When people look back on the early 20th century, tattoos were still seen as something for sailors, circus performers, or for the criminal underworld. Women with tattoos were considered scandalous, almost unthinkable. But Betty Broadbent carried herself with grace, humor, with confidence. She proved that tattoos and beauty could coexist on the same skin, and she did it decades before society was ready to accept it. Betty Broadbent was born in 1909 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The early 1900s were a time of enormous change. Electricity was reshaping cities. The first airplanes were flying overhead. And tattooing? Still a rough trade. It was practiced in docks, carnivals, and inside rooms across America. In those days, tattooing was far from glamorous. Tattooers worked in seaport towns and under bridges. They were tattooing sailors, soldiers, and drifters for a few coins. For a young girl like Betty to one day become the face of tattooed women everywhere was almost unimaginable. She grew up in a working-class family, likely surrounded by factory workers and street vendors, and the circus must have looked like pure magic. When a traveling show came through town, it was an explosion of sound and color. For kids of the era, it was a window into a world full of independence and adventure. By her late teens, Betty was drawn to that life. The circus world was a strange kind of freedom. For people who didn't fit in anywhere else, the artists, the dreamers, and the heavily tattooed, it was one of the few places they could truly belong. In 1927, Betty made a decision that would change her life. She walked in Charlie Wagner's tattoo shop in New York City's Bowery district. Wagner was already a legend. He'd learned from Samuel O'Reilly, who held the first U.S. patent for the electric tattoo machine back in 1891. I'll put a link to the video on the history of the tattoo machine in the description. The Bowery was the heart of early American tattooing, a gritty stretch of bars, sailors, and backrooms glowing with hand-painted flash. Wagner was known for his bold outlines and bright colors, and he took pride in his craft. When Betty came to him, he didn't just tattoo her. He created a full composition. Her bodysuit included angels, patriotic eagles, portraits, hearts, and of course banners. Across her chest, she wore a large spread eagle, an image symbolizing strength and liberty. Her legs and arms were covered with classic designs that looked straight off Wagner's flash sheets. Betty wasn't the only woman getting tattooed during that time, but she was unique in how she carried herself. Many women with tattoos in the early 20th century were performers, but few had the charisma and stage presence that Betty did. Other artists, including Burt Grimm, are believed to have contributed to her collection. Grimm, known for his meticulous line work and heavy black shading, likely contributed designs that balanced Wagner's style. Together, these tattoos became one of the most complete examples of American traditional tattooing from that period, etched on one person's skin. Her tattoos weren't random decoration. They were storytelling. Angels and hearts spoke to faith and love. Anchors and eagles reflected courage and patriotism. Each image had a purpose, and collectively, they became her armor and her identity. Once her tattoos were complete, Betty stepped fully into the circus world. She joined the sideshow circuit and began performing under names like the Tattooed Venus and the Tattooed Beauty. The sideshow was both opportunity and oddity. It offered a steady paycheck, but it also came with the label of curiosity. But Betty didn't let that define her. Instead, she leaned into it and used the stage as a platform. She performed with some of the biggest shows in the country, including the famous Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. On stage, she stood beneath bright lights, smiling as the crowd marveled at her tattoos. She didn't just show them off, she explained them. She described the process, and she told the stories behind each design. She was an ambassador for tattooing. People came expecting to see something shocking. What they saw instead was elegance. Betty's poise and beauty challenged everything audiences thought they knew about tattooed women. In an era that valued modesty and uniformity, her confidence was a rebellion wrapped in ink. Behind the scenes, life on the road was tough. Performers lived out of trunks, slept on rail cars, and traveled constantly. Circus life meant long hours, unpredictable weather, constant movement. But Betty thrived in it. She had a community of fellow performers, acrobats, sword swallowers, bearded ladies, people who, like her, had turned their differences into art. Betty's reputation grew quickly. Newspapers and magazines began featuring her, often describing her as the most beautiful tattooed woman in America. She appeared in promotional photos wearing fitted costumes that highlighted her tattoos, posing like a movie star. But even as her fame grew, she stayed grounded. Betty was known among performers for her humor, her patience, and her refusal to let anyone exploit her image. She was proud of her tattoos and proud of the tattooers who made them. In the 1930s, she toured internationally, performing in New Zealand and Australia with Worth's Circus and one of the biggest touring shows in the world at the time. The crowds were enormous. Performers like Betty drew intense fascination. When you look at the photos of her from that era, you see someone comfortable in their own skin. She had turned her tattoos into a stage costume, but also into a kind of armor. The ink gave her power in a world that wasn't built to celebrate women like her. In 1939, did something that made national news. She entered a beauty pageant at the New York World's Fair. Picture it, rows of contestants in satin swimsuits, each representing the ideal woman of the 1930s. Smooth, unmarked, polished. Then Betty walks in, covered in bold traditional tattoos, standing tall, smiling. She didn't win, but she didn't need to. Her very presence was the statement. Betty proved that tattooed women could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone else and still embody beauty. The newspapers at the time called her the most photographed woman at the fair. That one appearance shifted public perception more than years of performance ever could. She took tattooing from the carnival tent to the national stage. It was one of the earliest acts of tattooed self-representation in mainstream culture. After the fair, Betty returned to the circus life she loved. For decades, she performed across America, traveling coast to coast. Her act was simple, but captivating. She'd walk on stage, smile, and start talking about her tattoos, where she got them, what they meant, and how people reacted to them. She invited curiosity rather than hiding it. Audiences leaned in. Her success also helped keep the tattoo industry visible during years when tattooing went underground in many cities. Betty's name appeared in programs, magazines, and tabloid stories that reached thousands of readers who might have never even stepped into a tattoo shop. Circus work was demanding, but Betty carried on well into the 1950s. She watched new generations of performers come and go. By the time she retired to Florida, she had performed for millions. In 1981, the National Tattoo Association held its first convention. At that event, Betty Broadbent became the very first person ever inducted into the Tattoo Hall of Fame. It was a poetic moment. The tattooed lady who had once been considered a sideshow curiosity was now celebrated by the tattoo community itself. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Tattooers who had grown up seeing her photos now honored her as part of their lineage. Betty passed away in 1983, but she lived long enough to see tattooing begin its transformation from fringe to art form. Today, Betty Broadbent's influence stretches far beyond the circus tent. Every tattooed woman who appears on magazine covers, in television, or social media owes a little something to her courage. She helped turn the image of tattooed women from spectacle into a symbol of empowerment. She showed that tattoos could tell stories, express identity, and really completely redefine beauty. Her body carried the work of early legends like Charlie Wagner and Burt Grimm, preserving their artistry through time. Even now, tattoos of her bodysuit are used by tattoo historians to study the evolution of traditional design. When I look at those photos today, I think about how much courage that took. To walk into a tattoo shop in the 1920s as a woman and sit for hundreds of hours under buzzing machines, and then step onto stage to show the world, unapologetically, that this is who you are. That's the kind of bravery that shapes culture. She didn't just perform. She helped lay the groundwork for a future where tattoos could be worn with pride. Betty Broadbent lived as proof that tattoos are not something to hide. She stepped into the spotlight when the world wanted her to stay in the shadows. She owned her story, and in doing so, she helped shift how tattoos and beauty were seen and how they were interpreted. The legacy of traditional tattooing lives in our skin and in our story. Thanks for being here. This one's getting me a little bit. Just this much. This much.